All right, let's dive in, folks. Today we're tackling something pretty big.
Oh, yeah.
The human mind.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, how Sigmund Freud saw it.
Right.
We're using his book, The Ego and the Id, as our main guide here.
Great book.
And let me tell you, it gets
Well, it's a lot.
wild.
It is.
Freud had some, well, radical ideas back then.
Oh, yeah. Definitely ahead of his time.
About what's really driving us,
Under the surface.
Yeah, beneath those everyday thoughts and actions.
Exactly.
One of the things that really struck me reading this is how Freud was already saying almost a century ago.
100 years ago, can you believe it?
I know, that we're not nearly as in control as we think we are.
Yeah, that illusion of control.
Right. He's basically like, hey, there's this whole other part of your mind, the unconscious, calling the shots.
Running the show behind the scenes.
And it's more powerful than we realize.
Oh, absolutely.
But how do you even wrap your head around that?
It's a tough one.
This idea of the unconscious, it's not like we can just look inside and see it.
Not tangible, right?
No. So how did Freud explain it?
Well, he used this analogy, the iceberg.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
That image you see, the tip above water. That's just a tiny part of the whole thing.
Right. Most of it's hidden.
Exactly. Most is submerged. Underwater.
So he's saying
Our conscious mind, what we're aware of, thinking, feeling right now.
that's the tip.
Yeah, like the tip of the ice.
And everything below.
That vast underwater part. That's the unconscious.
Wow. Okay, so it's not just forgotten memories down there.
No.
It's like active, powerful.
Absolutely
Yeah.
influencing us, even if we
Yeah.
can't see it.
But then wouldn't that make our conscious mind,
The me we think we are?
yeah, feel kind of powerless, like we're not really in charge?
That's a question Freud wrestled with, for sure.
And to make things even more complex.
He didn't stop at just conscious and unconscious.
Oh, no.
Nope, he gave us 3 levels. The conscious, preconscious, and the unconscious.
All right, let's
Break it down.
yeah, because I think a lot of people get those mixed up.
Happens all the time.
What's the difference between them?
So picture this. Your conscious mind, it's what you're experiencing right this second.
Like me listening to you, you talking?
Exactly. Now, the preconscious, imagine it like a waiting room in your mind.
A waiting room.
It holds stuff that's not in your focus right now, but you could easily grab it if you needed to.
Okay, give me an example.
What did you have for dinner last night?
Oh, pasta, I think.
See? You weren't thinking about it a second ago, but you could recall it.
The waiting room.
That's the preconscious at work.
Gotcha. So both conscious and preconscious, we can access them.
Right there, if we need them.
Then there's the unconscious.
The real mystery zone.
Yeah, what goes down there to that hidden realm?
It's the stuff our mind keeps hidden, actively hidden.
Why?
Because it might be unacceptable,
Oh.
threatening, maybe even traumatic.
Oh, I see.
Repressed memories, those forbidden desires.
The stuff we don't want to face.
Yeah, feelings that are too dangerous to admit.
But Freud's saying, even though it's hidden,
It doesn't just disappear.
oh no.
It still impacts us, big time.
It's like influencing us from the shadows.
You got it. On our thoughts, feelings, actions.
That's both fascinating and kind of creepy, isn't it?
Oh, totally. And that back and forth between the conscious and the unconscious. That's what fascinated Freud.
It led him to...
Another big idea.
Yeah.
The structural model of the psyche.
Which is?
The id, the ego,
What do
the
you think?
superego.
Here we go, the famous trio.
The big 3.
I know people have heard those terms, but...
They're a little abstract.
Yeah, how do you explain them so it makes sense?
Right. To regular folks, not just psychology experts.
Right?
Think of them as characters in your mind,
Characters.
each with their own motives, their own ways of operating.
Okay, I can picture that.
So the id, it's like that impulsive child we all have inside.
The one who wants candy.
Yeah.
Exactly. Wants it now.
No patience.
Zero patience, driven by instinct, pure pleasure principle.
I want what I want, and I want it now.
That's the id's motto.
Sounds exhausting, honestly.
It is. So who handles this demanding little guy?
Who's the babysitter?
That's where the ego comes in.
The ego. All right.
Think of the ego as the grown-up in the system.
The responsible one.
The one who learned from experience, developed out of the ids.
Okay.
It still wants to satisfy the id, those urges,
Makes sense.
but it operates on what we call the reality principle.
Meaning.
It tries to achieve those goals.
Id's goals.
Yeah, but in a way that works in the real world.
So not getting us in trouble.
Exactly. Socially acceptable and, not self-destructive.
The ego's like the master negotiator then,
Always compromising.
between the id's tantrums and what's actually possible.
You got it. A tough job, for sure.
Doesn't always get it right.
No, but it's always working, keeping things balanced.
To prevent.
Total meltdown.
Right. And then we have...
The third player, the superego. What's their role in all this?
The superego is like that voice of authority, internalized.
No, like our conscience?
Kinda. But it's more than that.
Okay.
It embodies our morals, right and wrong.
Judging the ego's every move.
Constantly. Striving for perfection makes us feel guilty.
When we mess up.
Yeah, when we don't live up to its ideals.
So it's like...
If the id is the demanding kid, the ego's the stressed out mediator.
And the superego is the strict parent.
Always watching, always judging.
But doesn't that create a lot of conflict inside us?
Oh, absolutely. How can we ever satisfy all those parts of ourselves?
That's the question, isn't it?
It is. And that's something we'll keep exploring as we...
go deeper into this book.
Yes. Because Freud's insights into all this, they have a lot to say about us.
About how we make decisions.
How we relate to others.
Even how we handle just being human.
The whole messy, complicated experience.
All right, well, this is already blowing my mind a little bit.
I hear you.
But I'm ready for more, so let's keep going.
Let's do it.
Okay, so we've got this internal drama going on.
Right.
I wants it all, ego's trying to be reasonable, and then there's the superego.
Weighing down the law.
But the superego, that's the one I think a lot of people struggle with.
It's tricky.
It's not just about following rules, right? Like the ones we learned as kids.
No, it's much deeper than that.
It goes deeper.
The superego, it's mostly unconscious. That's what makes it so powerful.
And potentially problematic.
Yeah, if it gets too strong, it can lead to all sorts of issues.
Like what?
Guilt, for one.
Oh, okay.
Even self-sabotage.
Wait, so even when we're trying to be good, live up to our own standards.
Exactly.
We could be setting ourselves up to fail.
Sometimes, yeah.
Because the superego, which is supposed to guide us to be better, might actually hold us back.
It's a bit of a paradox.
It is. So how does that happen? How does this unconscious guilt work?
Well, Freud saw it in a lot of his patients, those with neuroses.
They felt guilty, but didn't know why.
They'd have this pervasive sense of guilt, but not conscious of it.
Like a hidden program running in the background.
Perfect analogy, making them feel unworthy, like they don't deserve good things.
That's rough. And this guilt, does it, like, manifest differently, depending on the type of neurosis?
That's a great observation, and yes, Freud was very interested in that connection.
So, like, with hysteria.
With hysteria, the ego's working overtime.
Doing what?
Trying to repress that guilt, keep it out of conscious awareness.
Like shoving it under the rug?
Kind of, like burying a bad memory.
Out of sight, out of mind.
But it's still there, still impacting you.
Okay, so with hysteria, the guilt's hidden, but still messing things up. What about obsessional neurosis? What happens there?
Oh, obsessional neurotics, they tend to be very aware of their guilt. They don't know where it's coming from.
They just feel guilty?
They feel guilty, but can't connect it to anything specific.
No reason for it.
Exactly. Leads to those compulsions, rituals, intrusive thoughts.
Trying to make sense of it.
In a way, yeah.
It's like being judged and punished, but you don't even know what you did wrong.
Exactly. A constant trial with no charges.
Yikes. And then there's melancholia.
What we might call severe depression today.
That's where the superego really takes over.
It becomes incredibly harsh, relentless.
No mercy.
None. The ego's bombarded with feelings of worthlessness, despair.
So in that case, the superego isn't a judge anymore.
No.
More like a dictator.
Ruling with an iron fist.
And Freud linked this harsh superego to his death instinct theory, didn't he?
He did.
The one we talked about, thanatos.
Right, the drive towards dissolution.
So how does that tie into the superego being so mean?
Well, Freud suggested that when the ego represses the id's desires.
The id wanting all the pleasure all the time?
Yes, when those desires are pushed down.
Not allowed.
It actually strengthens the superego.
Hold on. So by trying to be good, by controlling those impulses.
Might accidentally make your inner critic even worse.
That seems so backwards.
It's counterintuitive, but that was Freud's observation.
So those repressed desires, they don't just vanish,
No.
They get redirected.
Turned inwards, fueling the superego's critical voice.
Like damming a river.
Eventually that water's got to go somewhere.
And it bursts through in the form of harsh self-criticism.
Basically. And remember how we said the superego forms early on?
Yeah, from our parents, especially the father figure. So if you had a super strict parent, very punishing.
You might be more prone to a harsher superego later in life.
Because that's the model you internalized.
Exactly. Those early relationships with authority figures, they lay the groundwork.
But it's not a guarantee, right?
No, of course not. There are always other factors.
But something's been bugging me. If the superego comes from those early identifications, those voices we heard as kids, how can it be unconscious? Shouldn't we be aware of those influences?
That's a good question. And what Freud's saying is, it's not just the rules and don'ts that get internalized.
It's deeper than that.
It's also connected to those instinctual drives of the end.
So even though I might remember my dad telling me to be good, the superego is taking that and mixing it with my own primal urges.
Exactly. It bridges that gap between the unconscious id and the conscious ego.
Making it this powerful and sometimes confusing force.
It's a lot to untangle. That's why it's so hard to understand our own judgments, our guilt, and why it's tough to change those patterns, find inner peace.
So then, are we just puppets to these unconscious forces?
That's where things get philosophical.
Because if we don't have control, how can we be responsible for our actions?
It's the debate, right. And Freud, while emphasizing the unconscious, also believed in our ability to gain awareness.
Understand it.
Yes, bring it into the light of consciousness.
So we're not just blindly following those urges.
By understanding them, we gain more freedom, more choice.
So it's not about denying the unconscious.
No,
it's about understanding it.
And integrating it into a healthier sense of self.
Okay, so maybe not puppets, but we've got these powerful strings attached.
That we can learn to recognize.
And maybe even loosen a bit.
Exactly.
This heavy stuff really makes you think about the whole nature of self-control.
It's a complex picture Freud was painting.
But also hopeful, in a way.
It is, because it suggests we're not just victims.
We have the potential to understand ourselves better.
And through understanding, find more freedom.
It's wild to think about all these parts of us, ego, superego, just doing their thing, interacting, and we're barely aware of it.
It's like Freud gave us X-ray vision into our own minds.
Right, and he doesn't stop there, does he? He connects these structures.
To those instincts we talked about.
Eros and Thanatos.
The life instinct and the death instinct, yeah.
He saw those as the real drivers, like the fuel for all our behavior.
Absolutely fundamental.
So Eros pushing us toward connection, creativity, pleasure, all that.
The drive to create, to connect.
And Thanatos, that's the death instinct pulling us the other way.
Towards, well, dissolution.
Even self-destruction, that sounds pretty bleak, honestly.
It can seem that way.
Yeah.
If you just look at it on the surface.
Right. Like we're just stuck between these two forces, forever battling it out.
But Freud's view is more nuanced than that.
Hopeful maybe?
I'd say so. Remember the ego?
Our poor, overworked ego.
It's always working, trying to manage both those instincts.
Find some kind of balance.
Exactly. Satisfying both life and death instincts in a way that's healthy.
That's got to be exhausting.
It is a tall order.
Trying to tame the id's wild urges and please the superego at the same time.
It's a juggling act, for sure.
Where does the ego even get the energy for all that?
That's the fascinating thing. It borrows energy from the id itself.
Wait, so it's using the id's power against it?
In a way, yes, like harnessing a wild river to generate electricity.
It's got to be careful not to get swept away.
Absolutely. And then there's the superego, adding to the pressure.
Always judging, criticizing.
And that's where anxiety comes in, according to Freud.
Anxiety.
It's like a signal that the ego's feeling threatened.
Threatened by...
Well, he outlined 3 types of anxiety.
3. Okay, lay them on me.
Neurotic anxiety. That's from the id's impulses.
Like it's about to lose control.
Exactly. Then there's moral anxiety. That's the superego's doing.
Guilt and judgment.
And lastly, realistic anxiety.
That's the real world, right? Actual dangers.
Precisely. So the ego's got a lot to watch out for.
No wonder we get stressed. It's like a 3-alarm system going off all the time.
It's a lot to handle.
But even with all that, Freud thought the ego was pretty resilient.
Oh, incredibly so. Always adapting, learning new ways to cope.
So we're not helpless, even though these unconscious forces are so strong.
There's room for growth, for change.
That's good to hear. Gives me some hope.
It should. But here's another twist. Freud also pointed out that the ego...
The ego, which is supposed to be the rational one...
It can be pretty sneaky, too.
Sneaky how?
It uses defense mechanisms to protect itself.
Defense mechanisms like what?
Denial, for one, or rationalization, projection. There's a whole bunch.
So it's trying to avoid anxiety by twisting things around.
Protecting itself, maintaining that sense of balance.
Can you give me an example of that? In real life, how these defenses play out?
Imagine someone who's jealous in a relationship.
Jealousy, that's a tough one.
It is. So instead of admitting to that feeling,
which might be painful to admit to,
they project it onto their partner, accuse them of being jealous instead.
Oh, wow. So it's like turning it around.
Avoid facing those uncomfortable truths about themselves.
So the ego's trying to help, in a way, but those defenses can backfire.
If we're not aware of them, we can get stuck.
Right, stuck in those patterns.
That's why awareness is so important.
So we can make conscious choices instead of being driven by those hidden things.
Exactly. This has been quite a journey, this deep dive.
It really has. Freud's work is, well, intense.
It is dense, but so rewarding.
So what would you say, like, the main takeaways are from the ego and the id?
Well, firstly, that we're way more complex than we think.
Not just simple rational beings.
No, we're these dynamic systems, constantly in flux, influenced by so much.
With those hidden parts, those unconscious motivations.
Shaping our thoughts, our feelings, even if we don't know it.
And Freud gives us a way to understand that, right?
He gives us a map, a framework.
The id, ego, superego, those instincts, how the ego tries to cope.
It's all there in his work.
It's like he gave us a new way to see ourselves and the world.
A lens that reveals those hidden depths.
The complexities of being human.
Exactly.
And even though Freud's ideas have been debated, they're still so influential.
They really shaped how we think about the mind.
And they keep inspiring new ideas in psychology, therapy, even art.
It's amazing how far-reaching his work is.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the ego and the id, we gotta ask,
What are we leaving our listeners with?
if the ego, our sense of self, is shaped by all these unconscious things,
By forces we may not even know.
how much control do we really have over our lives? That's something to think about as you continue your own journey of self-discovery.
It's a lifelong journey for sure, and this is just one step.
The ego and the id is a great place to start, but there's so much more to explore.
Countless paths, countless insights waiting to be uncovered.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, keep diving deeper.
That's how we grow, how we understand ourselves better.
And that's what this deep dive is all about. Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.